Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. I'm really glad that you're giving this episode a listen, which is meant for analytically minded marketers. Let's get straight to today's show. Those of us in the digital economy think a lot about growing our business, but we don't think as much about the tech that enables customers to interact with our business. When our sites don't run smoothly or aren't available, our customers suffer, and it stops working as our sales and marketing engine. We give these unfortunate episodes terms like a site crashes or it croaks. And that gives us a perception that sites are either alive and well or completely dead, when its health really resembles our own human body more. Meaning, a website can give off warning signs that can be diagnosed and treated before anything really bad happens. It doesn't take invasive tools to catch these either. Monitoring services that run without any special site access can detect issues. These tools that take a site's pulse are also good to gauge our ability to handle business growth. Our guest has always called Ottawa Canada his home. He has also always had an entrepreneurial spirit, supporting the local startup scene since the 2000s, which is where I first met him. After earning his computer science degree, he began his career working at a local web tech firm. A stint at a design agency stoked his enthusiasm for websites, and in 2010, he joined the parent company of internet service provider and web host Rebel.com, which is allied with domain registrar internet.ca. And he took on the CEO role for both companies, where he saw firsthand how the internet fuels communication and could create value. In 2013, he took on additional responsibility as a director of the not-for-profit Canadian Internet Registration Authority, CIRA, where for the last decade, more or less, he has staunchly pushed for the internet to be used as a force for good in Canada. Work-wise, after stepping away from Rebel and Internet, he returned to his technical and startup roots. Based on his observation that while websites are getting easier for non-experts to build them, they can also make mistakes that hurt the user's experience of their site with equal ease. And that has led him to launch Onic, a product that monitors website fitness. Let's go talk with Rob Villeneuve. Rob Villeneuve, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Glenn, thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of the
Oh,
pod.
Geez, thank you. So we're going to get into what people need to know, no matter which part of an organization they're in, but what they should know about this important property of theirs that is an engine for their business, and it's their website. Now, we can kind of eliminate some things here. You don't build websites. You don't, until recently, you have not been registering websites, and you don't maintain the content on those websites. So, many of our listeners might be wondering, okay, well, what's left? What, in a nutshell, would you say your passion is when it comes to websites?
Well, Glenn, I think you're outing me off the top here is not being a marketer,
Sure.
which is fun for being on a marketing
Right.
podcast. I've listened to a bunch of the podcasts you've had recently, and you've had some incredibly intelligent people on it. So maybe I won't be the most intelligent marketer, but I'll bring some enthusiasm and energy. All right.
Great.
All right. And I'm going to bring some enthusiasm and energy to website performance.
Okay. So what is website performance?
Yeah, website performance is, basically how fast and how reliable does a website operate. Specifically for marketing and content websites, they're marketing online, they're marketing to Google, they're bringing visitors to their site. They want those visitors to have a very positive experience. There's a lot that goes into a positive experience. They want the branding front and center, the messaging front and center, the tone front and center. But at the end of the day, the website has to work, and the
Hmm.
website has to be fast and friendly to use. So my obsession over the last 2 decades of working on websites has been a lot on the operational integrity, health, and quality of the website.
So we've got different kinds of websites. We've got e-commerce sites, we've got lead gen sites, we have maybe information websites, if I think of like Wikipedia. So you're saying that there's kind of something that unites them all, which is how they perform, uh, maybe the experience that the user has, or in some cases that the user doesn't have. So I'm talking about downtime. So can you maybe give us a hint as to what this crazy thing of downtime is? I mean, I I joke about the fact that there are literal searches and tools online that people can type in, "Is the internet working?"
Yeah,
Um, right? Like, if it isn't working,
exactly.
think about what you just typed.
The
Uh,
culture of downtime. And Glenn,
yeah. And where
you,
where does that problem happen? I mean, like, whose fault is it when a website goes down?
and how has that changed over time? Like, it's a really interesting thought. I mean, for the last couple decades, you and I have both worked in this space,
Hmm.
and the user's perception of what downtime is and how acceptable it is has changed over that period. Back in the day when we were all running big server closets,
Yep.
we would have accidents that would happen that would bring sites down for hours, and that was just the way the internet was as we were all building it. Today, expectations are far, far beyond that, where users are expecting websites to work uh, all the time. So
Yep.
they're approaching 99.99 or 99.999% uptime, which back in the day were targets of uptime that were reserved for infrastructure like telcos. Um, but today, users have just grown to expect that websites will work, and certainly the best websites do work, and the best web apps do
Yes.
work the vast majority of the time. So anytime it doesn't work for whatever reason is a real negative experience for the user. I'll offer up one interesting exception,
Okay.
and that's when a cloud provider goes down and it
Yeah.
wipes out a third of the internet.
Yeah.
There seems to be a user perception of, oh, they get a pass because AWS is down or Google Cloud is down, and if Twitter and Netflix are down, well then
My humble little
my
website.
humble little website can be down too. So uptime is an interesting thing. It kind of depends what's going on in the zeitgeist, and if you're down with a bunch of others, it's a little more acceptable. um, but generally, uptime, downtime, it's one of those things that's just expected. I don't think you win any awards for lots of uptime, but you certainly uh,
Can
frustrate
lose
some
them.
users and
Yeah.
lose them if there's downtime.
Okay. And there are some entities out there and some ways of building your infrastructure so that it can be fault tolerant. I'm thinking of some of those CDNs. I'm thinking of Cloudflare, those checks that you see before
Yeah.
you as a user can get on a website. But I, you tell me, I mean, do we have to resort to those, or are those things that we're seeing on very large websites? And there are actually some simpler, less expensive steps that we can take to know about downtime or prevent downtime? Like, do we have to go to those solutions, or do we have other options in front of us?
The ecosystem is rich, Glenn, with options and decisions, and a whole bunch of different tech stacks from
Yeah,
from old to
lots of
new and
lots
different
of people who want to
varieties.
take my money. Yeah,
So context matters in this. I do want to step back for a second and offer a personal experience, though. As much
sure.
as we can quote stats and numbers about uptime, downtime, I live in Ottawa. You live in Ottawa.
Yep.
I don't know the last time you tried to register your kid for swimming lessons in this city. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
but
you're bringing
but
bad flashbacks.
yeah, but for me and my cohort here, my daughter's that age. Uh, we would be doing swimming lessons that it's a horrible experience, and everyone in the city knows it who has to register for swimming lessons. And the only thing, there's a lot of things that are could be better with that service, but the most horrible thing is that at 9 o'clock on Tuesday night when they
Yeah.
open the swimming lessons,
Yeah.
there's downtime, and it has to be, the first most major metric around performance that impacts the user experience and just the frustration we all feel. The joke is we all pour a tall glass of wine and sit down at 9 o'clock and click, refresh until the site comes back up.
Right. Right. Just hammer that refresh button.
Hammer
Yeah.
it. So, like, I just want to put that out there that, I think we've all had that experience. So it's not hard for anyone to relate to the experience of what it's like. When a website is just performing so poorly that it's not even operational, and how out of sorts that feels for today, right? That's
Yeah.
just not something
And
that should happen.
right. And let's not forget that, that's a public service. So it's not like people have an alternative that they can go to. I mean, I'm sure there are private swim companies that are more than ready
Certainly.
to fill that. But what I'm saying is, in most private sector engagements, the customer always has choice. And we must be mindful of that. So if
Well,
we push them into that terrible, you must all come on at this time and wait, we know what they're going to do. They're going to bail.
they're going to bail, and it's frustrating. And there are all alternatives. If for swimming lessons,
Yeah.
there's private lessons and other alternatives. But and I'd argue for the city, like, it's not that usability and user experience doesn't matter to them. I'm sure they'd love to have a positive experience. um, but there's reasons that they're using this technology, and I don't want to discredit it and say, just replace the whole thing. Like, there's challenges in organizations that are real, that are beyond performance, that sometimes performance gets the short end of the stick. I just highlight it because it's a pretty universal experience that we've all
Yeah.
had. And there's lots of things that you can do around this, and it's maybe my first point is that launch strategy is one that's set up to bring maximum amount of traffic in minimal amount of time. And before you even talk technology, I think you could look at, why are we trying to bring the entire
Yeah.
swimming population in the city to our website at precisely 8:59 p.m. on a Tuesday?
Yeah.
So, that's an interesting challenge. And I think it's real in a lot of organizations that intuitively, from maybe a marketer's point of view, to have a launch, to have a moment where it all happens, to have a crescendo is enticing. But if your stack can't really handle that, and it's going to
Yeah.
just create negative experiences, the first place I'd look is, can we use a strategy that still feels that way, but distributes the traffic over a period of time such that there's no one peak event that cripples the system. I would see this a lot with memberships and subscriptions,
Right.
where there's really no difference between renewing your membership or subscription today or tomorrow. Yet the email campaign to remind people to renew their subscription was always like a blast to everybody.
Yes.
So there's a lot of risk in that. Well, there's risk to performance. There's risk if anything in your tech stack fails. It's going to impact the maximum number of people. That's not very good. And there's also the impact of, often with these launches, there's a lot of change and things that we put into these websites. A spelling mistake on the homepage. Like, if that gets noticed, and we had more of a progressive release, it'll be the first visitors that notice. There's time to repair and react before the
Yeah.
second wave of visitors arrives. So
Yeah.
so really, the first thing is, hey, let's have a strategy that doesn't maximize the intensity on the system. I used to have a mantra, like, don't create peak events. Say it with me,
Yeah.
Glenn.
Spikes are
Don't
bad.
create peak events.
Yeah. Spike. Just stay away
Don't
from the
don't
spike if you
no
can.
spike loads. And a few simple tactics. Suddenly, you've reduced your performance needs dramatically.
Yeah. I love that. And I mean, I think there's some plasticity required from us. I'm thinking specifically of my peers who log into things like Google Analytics. And I think the prevailing thinking that a tool like that or other things that you look at, maybe Google Search Console, what they tend to do is they tend to make you think that the experience of one visitor is the experience of all.
Mm,
And you have highlighted, so yeah, let's be clear, a spike event, the actions of maybe, a few, like those few that go over what you could absolutely bear, cause all to suffer with an outage. But there are other times where we could find that only a few people on the website are experiencing a problem. I'm thinking of slowdowns, latency, poor responses, maybe the odd, error that it throws back that, they have to refresh to actually see their next screen. um, this is not something that I think is intuitive for marketers, but you would be able to spot these kind
oh,
of
interesting.
problems. Can you tell me, like, how do we how do we even gauge when most of our users are cool with what they're seeing, but some are really not cool? How do
You
you
know,
track
there's
that?
yeah, the first place I would look is in speaking to the customers. If there's at all a way of collecting the feedback, they'll give it to you. And certainly
Yep.
in my experience, the users haven't been that far away that they they'd let us know if a site wasn't meeting expectations. So there's that direct feedback is still key. And as a technologist in this, I think it's our key not to like just immediately dismiss them as a one off and say, oh
Ah,
yeah, you had a bad experience. It might be your connection or your setup or your
okay.
browser, but
But
to like treat them with a little bit of be inquisitive
right.
about what it is. And then certainly, I'm in the business of monitoring. My previous life, running a web host and registrar, we monitored everything. And you can see it clear as day in some of the monitoring and metrics that come back. And if you treat those as KPIs for your organization, they're just front and center. Um, the basic performance metrics that kind of indicate whether a user is having a good experience or not. And at this point in the web, the tools to capture those statistics are
Yes.
very mature and widely available.
Nice. And yet, that may be true in a case where the website is the company's business. So, your org chart, there is a person reporting to the CEO who knows their job is to keep those statistics healthy,
Right.
keep the website up. I'm thinking of companies where maybe they're a professional services firm and the website is still very important, but it's your marketing team who's responsible.
Yeah.
And maybe it's customer success that is seeing those chat sessions where people say, I'm not having a good experience here. Your website's, giving me all kinds of trouble. Um, we need to look around our organization, and it may not be so obvious by the org chart, but we need to kind of reach out to those other departments or people that look after those things, and we need to construct those loops. We need to be brought in when a KPI falls off, right? We need to know
Yeah.
because there's only one customer, and this is a common experience. We have to be, rushing
Yeah.
forward, no matter which seat in the company we are sitting in, so that we can do our part to
Yeah.
address it.
Glenn, if I could offer and jump in with me here as we kind of brainstorm, but like, I deal with a lot of organizations that are non-technical. And technology is not their main thing. I
Yep,
think the modern web is awesome, and the fact that there's so many tools available and it's become so mature that you could be uh, a home gamer in your basement and put up an awesome website. You could be a marketer, you
true.
could be an XEO expert, you could be a graphic designer, or you could be a programmer. But really, it takes all those components to make a great website, right? So even if you're doing it at home, you might be strong in one, not strong in the other. And what I'm noticing is that agencies are much like that too. So if you have an agency that you're working with that's responsible for all of your technology and tech stack,
Right.
they might be far better at content and marketing than they are at technical operations.
Yeah.
So I think what we could do is boil it down to a few questions that anyone could ask, no matter if it's an internal team or an external provider. to say, like, what's the health of my website? And the first question would be is, was there any downtime this month? And if so, how long did it take for us to figure it out?
Right. So sometimes it's the alert itself that
Yeah.
is it's the fact that the tree fell in the forest, but there
Like
was nobody there to hear it.
let's be honest, technology can fail, will fail. You have to
Yeah.
plan for the fact that something's going to go wrong at some point. So it's not the fact that there is downtime once in a while that we should be afraid of. And in fact, if we, practice the mantra of move fast and break things and be completely innovative, um, then okay, well, things will break. So the real indicator to me is, well, how long did it take for us to figure it out and fix it?
Yeah.
Expecting that it'll happen. And then the same thing around just a couple of the core website statistics. So they have, Core Web Vitals, I think, is your best bet
This
for
is what
basic.
our people in SEO know that very well.
Yeah, they know that very well. And not to say that it needs to be maximized, but because I think, at some point there's a lot of diminishing returns even on those. However, you should know what they are and you should know if they've changed. So I think those are really the indicators is did something go wrong and how long did it take us to read and react? Um, in working with companies and in helping them with their monitoring, I think it's easy for leadership to assume that their vendor or their team is doing those things.
Yeah.
But let's be empathetic for a moment. Some of those teams have 1,000 responsibilities far beyond the website, especially if it's like internal IT looking after the site. They've got a lot of things to look after. This is but one. And I find often that, we'd expect those basic kind of metrics and measures to be in place, but in fact they're not.
Hmm.
So it's not hard to just to ask, like, what is the number, and if there was a problem, like, what happened? Tell me about what happened. And that's about as far as a leader would need to go to know, yes, the measure is in place, and yes, if something were to happen, we would be able to react. And my mantra is, as long as you know and you fix it quickly, like, no harm, no foul.
Yeah. Right. Or, well, what do they say in the restaurant business? It's not what if you spill a plate of food right in front of a customer, it's not what you've done, but it's what you do about what you've done. You can either
Yeah,
recover that situation and, make them a lifelong patron, or you can make them so angry they stomp out and tell all their friends
yeah,
you're a terrible restaurant.
yeah.
Um,
It's exactly it.
the decentralized part of this, like, I don't think we can escape that you brought up agencies. We talk about maybe a person over in IT. We've got, different people who are looking at different things. The SEO team is, yes, looking at what Google is reporting back to them about the website. But there's, maybe you've got sales, maybe you've got the HR folks who are trying to receive applicants through the
Yep.
website. So many different people that only have a sliver of this. I can see it in things that are not a, four alarm fire, the whole website's down. In those small little annoyances, I can just see those getting lost if there isn't, for example, a Slack channel inside the company, or a procedure for pinging someone. It's bound to get lost if it doesn't have a particular, place. Like, I'm even harkening back to the old days of suggestion boxes
Yeah.
near the water cooler.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you have to think about how these, when they happen or when they might happen, you have to think about how they might be caught and actioned.
Caught. Yeah. Understood. Caught and actioned, and when do you know? And there's a few thoughts that come to mind on that, Glenn. I mean, this comes back to just basic organization leadership and communications. At the end of the day, does your organization make a department or someone accountable
Yep.
to these kinds of things? And to what degree is that accountability surfaced to the rest of the organization, or discussed, or brought forward, or made part of the culture? At very technical organizations, this is naturally part of the culture because it's how we think. um, at non-technical organizations, it's a little easier just to imagine it happening without actually auditing that it's happening.
Yep.
So I like your idea, for organizations, like if there's a Slack channel around alerts. I was thinking back to my time at Rebel. We were in physical offices, but we had TVs
Sure.
up that were dashboards
Okay.
that would
And
run
for
stats.
folks who don't know, what is Rebel?
Oh, Rebel is a web host and domain registrar here in Canada, and I was their CEO for about a decade.
Okay.
And you could imagine that operations was super critical to us because well, one, we're operating a very large e-commerce website. Two, what we
Yep.
sell are websites to people. So this culture is ingrained. But just to give you an example, as we have these dashboards up, if something were to go wrong, those dashboards would show a skull and crossbones, and that's it. Stop
Whoa.
everything. There's a critical problem. Let's do something about it. And then when it wasn't a critical problem, they would show the kinds of metrics that we cared about that were our good indicators for performance. And
Yeah.
an organization like that, we're changing things so often that inevitably there'd be a mistake somewhere, a problem somewhere. You just expect it to happen. So when it does, it gets found by maybe auditing or testing before we release, hopefully. And
Right.
if not, it gets found by the monitoring system, and we can fix in place.
Yeah. So, and I want to dwell on this for a second because I did have the chance to go down to your offices. And what I want to convey to people, because I think people can get scared by this notion that there's big skull and crossbones throbbing on screens, and that they wouldn't get any actual work done, because I think most of us, our mind goes to like NASA mission control, where
Right.
it seems that everybody's sitting in one direction just like staring at it all the time. That's not the case. These were the ones that you're referring to. These dashboards are they're basically along thoroughfares in the office on walls and such, and you're walking by them. So they're not intruding in your work, but when it's necessary,
The
and
alarm
because
goes
you
off.
see them so regularly, you spot things, or things are called to your attention when it's time to do something.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
I
that's a way we need to kind of just get habitually used to.
habitually
Okay,
used to, and culturally okay with everybody knowing, right? Like, I think that's
right,
the other bit
right,
is hey, it's down. Everybody has a role to play. And
yeah,
even if you don't have a direct role in solving the problem, you might have a role in communications. You might have a role in helping support, chat with customers that are having problems. You might
yeah.
just know that your project is not important at this particular moment. Don't distract somebody. It was a culture of everybody knowing. So bring it back to the remote workplace and a Slack channel that everyone can see. That
Yes,
that would just be part of the culture of, we expect to have downtime and problems. We know we're going to have them. When they occur, it's okay. We all know there's nothing to be embarrassed about.
I love that. Yeah, well, and it comes from the top, and I think you said it. I'm going to use your own words: "No harm, no foul."
Oh,
So even if the
let's get
comms
on fixing
person,
it.
yeah, even if the comms person thinks, "Well, this is something that I need to jump on our social channels
Yep.
and tell people our service is down. We're aware of it and we're working on it."
Goes a
Like,
long way. Goes a long way.
but yet, there's so many people who, depending on what kind of workplace they've been in the past, will think that heads will roll if you do that sort of thing. You're saying, no, 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 the opposite. Be open about it, talk about it, because people then can step in and fix it.
100%.
Okay. Um, I want to get into more of how we do this, because I think people might have ideas of how you need it and how much big iron machinery is required for this sort of thing,
Right.
and it's less than they think. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break. Let me step away for a second to note, on social, you'll see show-related updates about our guests. You'll see what's happening behind the scenes. Or you can simply talk to me. And I've really loved how lately a few of you have posted positive comments about the show. It encourages me in making this podcast the best it can be. So find Funnel Reboot on LinkedIn or Instagram or X. Click follow and maybe say hi. Thanks a lot. Let's get back to the show. All right, Rob, we've got the sense of, how we're trying to get a consolidated view of, things that are critical when they go down, or things that are just annoying in terms of, their suboptimal performance. And I go from my background of, looking at websites sometimes under the hood. I know that every website has a database, and I know that those databases are logging when events happen. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm so old, I remember back to the days of web server logs and how we used to try to use
They're
those
still here,
to
Glenn. They're
understand. They
still
are,
here.
right? But those are way down in the plumbing levels of a website, while they would tell you things like there was a timeout or somebody hit a 404 or 403 or some other kind of error. Truth is, we don't need to get that deep, and we don't need to have such god level access to the data to even understand how a website is performing. So, how little information
Yeah.
can you get? How much do we actually need to measure? I guess measurement approach. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, Glenn, I heard a couple of your previous speakers, guests on the podcast talk about this too. And, it's very analogous to like dashboard fatigue, right? And,
Yeah.
and, and really, you can have all of this data, but it's just completely overwhelming to the point where there's no insights and inaction because of it.
Yeah.
And people's eyes cross.
Yep.
And so the real magic here is, well, how do you get all the way back up to the simple dashboard that's easy and actionable, and when it's time to do something, and roughly what's wrong. So I think that it's similar here. In my world, we'd call this the observability maturity model. And it really would put you on a gauge from, how well can you inspect your systems and performance, all the way from a beginning organization that's not really doing any of this but thinks it might be important, and just wants to get started, all the way up the 5-step ladder to you're collecting every piece of data, and you can almost anticipate things before they happen.
Okay. So let's go to that low end of the ladder. Go to that word, within observability. So are you saying that we can have one system that is a quote unquote observer of the other systems that run the website, and that it can, even as an outsider, just peek at the transactions between the other systems on the
Yeah,
website,
if
and then it
if
can just look at those and go, I think that's a problem.
yeah, I think what's important to do first is to put your kind of boundary on what it is you're looking at here, or what's your objective. And my objective, my company Onyx objective, is simply around website performance.
Hmm.
And really, when you go through that, you want to know, it's the same questions we surfaced earlier, right? We want to know what's our uptime. If we had downtime, how long did it take us to find out and repair the problem? And we want to know how fast is our website from both a measured point of view. We can go out and sample these things by actually running tests that visit the site. And we
Ah,
want to know from a visitor's point of view, and we can use tools like Core Web Vitals to kind of capture the real world statistics on this. And those are kind of the basics, right? Is you just want to know that those basic things are in place. If you had a problem, it wouldn't necessarily tell you everything you needed to know to hone in on where the issue was or how to fix it, but at least if there's a problem or not. And
it would hint at it.
it would
Yeah.
hint at it, and is there opportunity. So that's what my company Onic
Okay.
aims to do, is to bring organizations from, like, 0 to 1 on that observability maturity model.
So I think all of us can intuitively grasp how an uptime monitor, what was it, the Verizon commercials, can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Yeah.
now? Right. So we can all get that. It's pinging the
That's the
website and the
easy
web.
one to imagine.
Take us further. What else can we at least get a vague hint of by having that outside observer looking at the website? What else can we find out?
Well, I think you want to find out, like, from a user's point of view, so usability, user perspective, like how long did it take them from deciding they're going to your website or clicking the link to your website to actually seeing and interacting with your website. And
Okay.
that's what Core Web Vitals
Yep.
measure, but there's a few other key metrics we want to put in there too, like specifically response time, and all of these are samplings that we can take of your site without without installing anything or doing any configuration or deep metering. These are all just you know things you can get through sampling public resources. um,
Right.
and you want to understand how fast your site is at the end of the day. I mean, you can go and Google all the research on this, but it's plentiful at this point, about how really your target is to get the whole site loaded in front of the user, ready to go within a second. Through my research, what I've found, and what the numbers also support, is that's a kind of target that feels like it's reserved for like the top performers on the web. And traditionally that's the way it's been. That might be what Amazon and Netflix aim for, but what about my little organization?
Right.
But I think what's changed over time is that the tooling in order to be that fast is now available to anyone. It can be attached to all kinds of tech stacks, like specifically if we talk about like content and delivery networks, or maybe upgrading your web host. These kinds of things can have a dramatic impact on speed, and they're readily available. Like I don't think any organization should think that those kinds of tools that the big boys use are out of reach.
Okay.
So I think, when we frame performance and frame it being that fast, we also have to frame it as being like, that's achievable. That's a reasonable target. And there's many websites out there that, quite frankly, don't come anywhere near that target, likely because they're afraid of the cost of and level of effort, or having the knowledge or expertise to get there. But what I'm trying to assure you is that these tools have matured so much and are so widely available, that it's certainly possible. So that should be, a
Right.
realistic target for everyone.
Nice. Yeah. How would we know if let's say me and my merry band of co-founders are running in a startup? How would we know what a site 100x or 1000x our size has as their infrastructure? But what you're helping me see is that these stacks behind our websites,
Yep.
they can have, they can be implemented at different levels of healthiness, or integration. Some can be integrated well or not well.
Yep.
We can see this, and that our traffic plays a role. Like if Google happens to smile on us because we are starting to get a little better, that's going to raise our search engine rankings, which has a follow-on effect of we'll get more visitors, but those more visitors might place more stress on our stack, which
Yeah.
then might hurt our core web vitals, which will then hurt our SEO. Right? It's a wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to get super technical here, but I mean, honestly, the technology that exists now that kind of changes the game, and it's been around forever. But what I'm saying is, it's so much more available to smaller properties, or content delivery networks. Like, this has become a standard part of a good performing website.
Okay,
Um,
can you give us the one sentence on a CDN? What is
Yeah,
it?
it's probably two sentences, but
Okay.
but but the two sentences, a CDN will take the content that your website serves from the server, and it will remember it, and it will distribute it across the world, across their network.
Right.
CDNs generally have 300 or so remote sites around the world that remember all of your website's content. So when a visitor goes to your website, rather than hitting your web server directly, and for small orgs, that's likely one web server somewhere in North America.
Yep.
Instead, it'll download the content from the closest point of presence in the CDN. So that does two things. It makes that content a lot faster for that end user to load, which is awesome. It's optimizing your performance. But you'll also recognize in that scenario that's actually taking load off of the server. So now the server should technically, be able to use the same amount of capacity, but spread it further, because fewer requests make it all the way back to
To
the
the
server,
first server.
to
Yeah.
the first server. And these are the tactics you see like Shopify use, and Squarespace and all these different service providers. Like that's what they're doing out of the box. Is their offering is coming with baked in, ready to go, a content delivery network. And there's a number of vendors, Cloudflare, Fastly, that you could set up on any website. A lot of what I see are WordPress websites that just out of the box. This isn't something that happens naturally. You have to configure it.
Yes.
Um, and if you do, you get anywhere from 10 to 100x performance gains and take load off your server. So it's a win-win to use this kind of technology.
It can be. If I think of how, like we were just talking a moment ago about how we're checking to see the health and seeing where those core web vitals are at. if we're seeing that we are definitely below some industry benchmark, like you said, a 1 second response,
Yeah.
then we can start to put the case together that we need to get a CDN. But I think the shift that I needed to make to understand how we would do that is that I'm not getting pinged by a uptime downtime monitor and just looking at those in isolation, but I'm using something that is in an ongoing way checking on the website
Yeah.
and how it's logging those, and I'm getting historical data that pools and shows me a trend. So I can go to my leadership and say, all right, we seem to be okay right now. But if we continue to grow at this rate, I'm noticing that our site will get slower and slower for the average user. We at some point will reach a breaking point. It will start
Mhm.
to affect relationships. But I have to see that trend in order to have that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, in that respect, you want some type of performance monitoring. Onic is a performance monitor. There's all kinds of tools out there that can do this, depending on whether you're coming at it from like a highly technical point of view or basic point of view. But Onic's point of view is that organizations that are non-technical just want the basic statistics in front of them, and they want to know if they've changed. And so that's what we do: is we go out and we monitor your website by sampling it a few times, or every few minutes, I should say, and just checking in on its health, its response time, its uptime, and its key performance metrics.
Yeah.
We also dive deep because not every page is created equal. We see
No.
that a lot, that people's About Us page is super fast, but their homepage or their landing pages are super slow.
Yeah. Or
Um,
something deep in their knowledge
to
library.
the landing page, we get maybe a little overzealous and put a lot onto it, which is a lot to load.
Right.
Understanding that not every page, even within a site, is equal. So doing depth monitoring is important to do on a frequent basis. And then whether you want to take a dashboard approach, you use Onic, you log in, you can check out your vital statistics at any point in time. They're up to date, real time. You compare them over time, both a short window and a long window, to see if you're improving or if things are degrading. Or you even go as far as setting up alerts and saying, hey, you know what? My minimum threshold here is, I want a speed score of 80 out of 100. And if I'm ever below that, I want to know. We put those tactics in place just to help an organization, like, have some of the monitoring in place that they would need to stay on top of this stuff.
When I think about how large websites work or how they even got to be large, one of the things that I know you're a fan of is taking small bets, being experimental about a website. I know for user experience, it's often quoted that Amazon will run thousands of tests on their website every
Right.
year. I know you have a passion for explaining to companies that this intangible, ability to find out what your customer wants and give it to them,
Mhm.
this is all premised on your site being robust enough to even take that risk. In fact, it's a pacing item for your ability to grow. Paint the picture for me of when a larger website is, they've got those screens out, they're looking at it, they're responding quickly to problems, but that's maybe a defensive play. What is the offense look like? What do you see large websites doing that propels them into the stratosphere in terms of running experiments, and like what does this make possible?
It's an interesting question. I frame it maybe a little differently in my mind, in terms of like, the ongoing monitoring and just having a culture of doing this stuff. Large organizations put teams on this stuff. They recognize the importance.
Mm,
There's whole engineering teams in charge of making sure that performance is a key metric, along with all the other testing that they might do. And if their traffic's high enough, A/B testing, multivariate testing, it's all part and parcel.
right.
Optimize conversion and optimize user experience. So they just have so many tools and tactics, and can go very, very deep, and they do, because it's important. But I also hear kind of in your question, Glenn, like if that's the if these kinds of procedures, even for small organizations, if monitoring and reading and reacting is kind of like the ongoing maintenance, keeping things healthy kind of approach,
Mhm.
like what's the first step if you know none of this? And I
Yeah.
think it's very easy to conduct an audit to know where you're at today, and are things healthy and performant today, or are there already issues, and if there are issues, what's the cost of remedy those issues, right? So I look more to, like, if we were going to be starting off with a new company, you'd start with an audit.
Yeah.
You're like what's here, what's good, what's bad, what's the lay of the land, what levers do we have to pull on, what are our constraints, what resource is going to run out first, you know the
Yeah.
basics of understanding these kind of health tactics.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the parallels to human health are hard to. At least I wouldn't try to do a triathlon until I talked with my doctor, and maybe we'd taken a couple of basic measurements and say, okay, here's the shape you're in, or whoa, there's some training you need to do. You need to get yourself, your cardio needs to be addressed. You need to get yourself into shape to be
Yeah.
able to do those things or to attempt them. So an audit, I like the physical that you would get to
let's,
snapshot.
let's maybe frame it this way too, which is, it's a like anything, performance optimization is a law of diminishing returns, and it's a lot harder to go from half a second to less
Right.
than it is to go from 5 seconds to 1 second, which is a really interesting phenomenon, right? Like, you can make massive performance gains with a few small tweaks. When I argue, people are always like, well, what's the value? And I say, well, the effort is next to nothing. so
Right.
so how much value do you want to present in order to justify that? Really, the wins of getting from a poor performer to being a decent performer far outweigh the cost of implementing some of these tactics.
Huh.
Uh, so that's a really interesting paradigm. I mean, you were talking about large organizations earlier, and I think if they have their performance stuff, kind of together,
Yeah.
they're at that other end of the spectrum where they're searching for really small gains, and it's likely
Yes.
a lot of work and cost and tooling to get it. It still matters, and it still makes the ROI equation work for them at that scale. But I don't want to paint that picture for small organizations, because the large organizations hopefully are much further down the maturity model. And early on in the maturity model, there's so many easy wins that are simply intelligent configuration and a little bit of strategy and putting the right vendors in place, um, to take performance from poor to fast.
I agree. And I'm going to double down on what you've said because if people do think, oh, well, then I just need to get from, totally out of shape to, I'm in reasonable couch potato shape.
Yeah.
Um, the thing is that what you really could be capitalizing on as you build this muscle memory, things like tracking your website's health, is you can apply, like this can spread inside of your culture and people can start noticing things they never saw before in your website analytics or in the funnel that is following on from the conversion point onwards. People can start to see we took an action over there and it had this good effect. Well, the data here suggests that we might be able to find more, to optimize over here. So let's run a little experiment or let's implement a change here for a short while and see what we get. And it really will spread to other areas and
Mm.
you'll start to do those practices that, like you say, for a big organization are second nature.
Yeah, I do think that, Glenn. I mean, I don't want to sit here and rhyme off all the statistics that everyone can find on Google around the impact of speed on conversion rate. So I did what any modern person would do and ask ChatGPT, what are the top
Yes.
5 things I'm going to do to increase my website's conversion rate?
Yeah.
And and lo and behold, sitting in there right alongside call to actions and what's the content and the overall experience, and honing in with A/B testing, is improve your site speed. It's clearly one of the pillars. It's not the only pillar, but it's one of the pillars. And I guess what I'm trying to share from my expertise is that for organizations where it's going poorly, it's probably far less difficult than they think, to get some performance gains, and that will ultimately have an impact on lowering bounce rate, upping conversion, upping lead collection.
Yeah.
Um, if you think that your funnel is 3 or 4 pages deep by the time the person reads the information they want wants to gain before filling out your contact form, and they're waiting 5 to 10 seconds between each of those pages, like, that's awful. It should be a second per page or less. And you can just imagine how much faster that experience would be, how less frustrating, and how that might impact bounce, engagement, conversion, these kinds of things. So it should be fairly obvious. I think, in talking with SEO and marketers, some of their pushback is perhaps they've been sold a false bill of goods.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that on two fronts. One is over optimization.
Yep.
Right. And going from bad to decent is going to have a lot of good benefit, and going from decent to one of the good ones is going to have a lot of benefit. But as I said, the law of diminishing returns, where cost increases and rewards decreases, you get towards the upper end of the spectrum. And a lot of the research shows that like there is a point when it's good enough.
Yeah.
You can eke more out of it. But I think, those that are professionally industry maybe got fatigued by like over optimization. So, that's not what we're talking about here per se. There's a limit to this stuff. The other angle is, I think there was a lot of hoopla back in like 2000, 2001 about which metrics Google was going to use directly impacting the SEO, SEM results, and the page rank. And I think the research is out that, like, yes, there's an impact, but maybe it's not as direct. There's not as direct a correlation as people might have imagined and might have sold. So that is a little bit of the feedback I hear. And some of the myth I want to dispel around, like,
I appreciate that.
Here.
Well, and if we just think about how things are architected now, I mean, that was in an era where it was the Googlebot crawler. And, I liken that to maybe having, if I had a restaurant, here we are back at the restaurant.
Yeah.
You've got a food critic, and they're coming on a particular night, and you give them that corner table, you give them your best host, you give them, the best entree. Okay, so maybe they write a glowing review, and then the other patrons are, having a lousy time. That doesn't exist anymore. Google has information on, logged in experiences of many of our visitors, and they're benchmarking us against our competitors. So let's just dispel that. We're better. My point in telling that is we're better to give all patrons a good experience, because Google is indirectly taking from all of them what our website is delivering as an experience. So we kind of have to. But
it's good business,
it's just good business. But the journey here that you're helping to outline for us of climbing this maturity curve is I think the biggest takeaway from this is the more you do, the more you can do, and that you can start with something that's as small a footprint as a small tool that's just observing your website pretty much from the outside. And Rob, if people want to find out about the particular tool that you have made, you've mentioned it, Onic, where can they go? Where would you send them?
I'd send them to onic.io to check out our offering. We got it listed on the homepage, exactly what we do. It begins with an audit to understand exactly what's going on with your current performance and understanding all these metrics.
Very cool. Hey, Rob, thanks again for coming on and for showing us a way that we can make our experience for our customers even better.
Glenn, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.